What's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be doing an engine bay cleaning, and I got a 20-year-old vehicle here that has a very dirty engine bay. So we'll be going over what to look out for because it's an older vehicle, things are not as waterproof, and how you can safely clean your engine bay without damaging things. Now of course, engine bay cleaning is just for looks, unless you live on a rust belt because you don't want salt in your engine bay, it will corrode things. But generally, engine bay cleaning is not necessary. So if you don't feel comfortable or risking damaging anything, then definitely don't do it. Now if you do want to clean engine bay, there are definitely ways that you can do it safely. And we'll be going over a couple of those things. So here we also have a much newer vehicle, and we can go over the differences with a new vehicle and an older engine bay, how they're different and why you should be more careful with older vehicles. So let's get to it. So for an older vehicle like this, the number one thing that you want to watch out for is actually not the battery here. It's actually the electrical connections here, all these connectors. The reason why you want to be careful of them is because you don't want water to sit in there, and you don't want to force water into the electrical connections. These connections, they're not made as well as the connections today, so they're not as water resistant as the newer ones. So when you wash the engine bay, you just want to be more careful with those connections. And a trick that I have is I like to use little microfiber pieces like this or plastic bags like this. So what I would do, I would just take this and put it over a electrical connection. Now another thing you want to watch out for is the alternator. Now the alternator is where electricity is generated for a regular gas vehicle like this. For this engine bay, you can't really see where the alternator is because it's actually hidden down at the bottom. So you don't have to worry too much about it. But if you do see your alternator sitting right here, then it's best to have a plastic bag to cover it because the alternator doesn't like too much water sitting in there. So when we're rinsing off, we're not putting a bunch of water in there and potentially cause damage. So for the tools that we're gonna need, of course, we're gonna have a wheel and body brush like this to scrub the surfaces. For the chemical, we're gonna heavily rely on an all-purpose cleaner like this. Now, since I have a pressure washer, I'll be taking advantage of it and use a foam cannon to put on some foam to give things a little bit more dwell time. Now, for the crevices, a little detail brush like this will also be very useful. So let's get to cleaning it. Now, don't forget to put on some personal protection. Gloves are always a good idea. So with all the important parts covered, we're ready to start washing. I'm gonna spray on some all-purpose cleaner. Just start breaking down the dirt. Now after it has a second to dwell, I'm gonna start putting on the foam cannon. And don't forget the top of the hood too. So now we can get to brushing. Just take your brush and just go over all the surfaces. There's really nothing complicated to it. And of course, for the parts that you covered up, definitely don't brush off your covering. So just kind of go over the parts that are visible, because that's what cleaning your engine bay is about. It's just to clean off the visible parts and the parts that you can touch, because there's really no point of getting this 100% clean. As long as the parts that you can see are cleaned off, then you should be good. Now for crevices like this, obviously a brush is a little big for it, so I'll use a detail brush like this Now, don't mind how used this brush is. You can use a nicer one, but you can just go over the smaller crevices with a brush like this. Commonly missed spots are like side walls like this. So we might see it up here, but the side walls are often very dirty too. So make sure you cover that too. Because when we look from the side, you're going to see the dirt. Oh, of course, don't forget the top. Again, just kind of go over the surfaces. No need to be super detailed. Just kind of go over everything, the parts that you're going to see. So now we're ready to rinse off. I have a pressure washer here. I want to take this about 3 feet away, 3 to 5 feet away from the engine bay, and just spray it down lightly like that. So just like that, everything's rinsed off. I didn't introduce too much water because I was holding it from further away, and the pressure washer actually doesn't use that much water compared to a hose. So now I'm gonna take off all the coverings and check my connections to see if they're fine. And as you can see, the connector that I covered up is bone dry. So now we're ready for wipe off. Now, as I'm wiping, you might see some of the stains are still here. It didn't really get cleaned off because it's a 20-year-old car. So there's lots of things that have collected and stained the paint that washing it is not gonna get it off. So most of the time, I would advise to just leave it and not mess with it. But if you do want to get rid of it, here's a trick. So you can see the stains over here that didn't get washed off. Now the trick I have is actually a magic eraser like this. So you definitely do not want to use too much pressure on it and do it bone dry. You want to use a lubricant. So I'm going to spray some All Clean, an APC, and spray it on here too, and just lightly glide on here. Now, the magic eraser is an abrasive. I would definitely not do this on the paint, on the exterior, but for the engine bay, it's fine because I'm not gonna see it too much, and it does get rid of the stain, so I can live with it. And as I'm doing this right now, it is in fact marring the paint. So that is a trade-off you do wanna be careful of. But before and after, guys. That was before, and the left is where I used the magic eraser. Just a few passes with minimal pressure. That's a big difference. Now again, if you're using a magic eraser like this, definitely want to be very careful. You don't want to use too much pressure because it will wear down the paint. But here I'm just doing a couple passes with minimal pressure. I'm not jamming it down onto the paint, just going a couple times. Just kind of shave off that stained layer so it appears bright white again. So just like that, that is as far as I will go. And remember, this is a 20-year-old vehicle. I'm not gonna perfect it and get the paint shining like new again. So I'm just gonna do this, and it already is a big difference, so I'm happy with it. Chasing perfection is definitely not what we're doing here. So now we're just gonna wipe off the rest of the vehicle and look for puddles to remove water from, like crevices like this. Just gonna jam my microfiber in there and suck up the water. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is you definitely do not want to do this when the engine's hot, so things don't evaporate on it instantly as you spray onto it. So nice, cool engines, definitely what you want when doing the engine bay cleaning. Now, I've gone over the engine bay and checked for all the puddles and make sure they're dry. And for wet surfaces, just kind of lightly wipe over them. It doesn't have to be bone dry because the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take an engine bay dressing. This is Chemical Guys VRP that I've diluted 1:4. So what I'll do is just give the engine bay a good spritz. A nice even coat. Now, if your engine bay doesn't have plastic parts, then don't bother with this, because this is really for the plastics and rubbers, and it's only for looks, honestly. So give it an even spray, and the next thing we'll do is just close the hood. So just like that, we have the engine turned on, and we're just gonna let it run for a couple minutes, warm up the engine, and that will evaporate the residual water and even out the engine bay dressing. Now for a newer vehicle like this, you'll notice that things are a lot more well insulated and they're a lot more covered. Things are tighter, so generally it'll be a lot safer to just wash this engine bay without worrying too much. But the one thing is, if you do have aftermarket parts, those are not necessarily going to be as water resistant as the OEM parts. So you do want to watch out for that, like this little module right here. So I'll just take the plastic bag and cover this up. And you see the connectors here for the aftermarket parts. I'll also take a microfiber to just cover this up like that. Now for this engine, we can see the alternator right here. To be extra safe, I'm just gonna have a microfiber here and just cover up this little opening so water doesn't just shoot straight down into the alternator. So just like that, that should be good, and we can get to cleaning it. Now we're ready to wash the engine bay. So for this engine bay, it's not very dirty. I'm just gonna go straight to the foam and skip the APC. Now, one thing I forgot to mention from the last engine bay is that it's better to start from the top to bottom, because as you clean the bottom, the top is going to drip down. So we're going to start from the top. I'm using a little wash mitt like this because there's more delicate parts in this engine bay. So I'm just wiping with my hand like this with a wash mitt. It's a very clean car since it's so new. So just quickly go over. And that's, of course, the easiest way to keep things clean. Maybe every other time you wash your car, just grab a towel, wipe down your engine bay, keep it well maintained, and you'll never have to wash the engine bay like the car next to me, the 20-year-old car, and let it get that dirty and needing to pull out a magic eraser. So if you do this often enough, it will stay like this. And now the engine bay, again, just quickly go through the parts. No need to go too deep into the engine bay, just the visible parts. And we got a more delicate part here that's made of carbon fiber. That's why we're using a wash mitt like this. Just give it a nice wipe down. Now honestly, for an engine bay like this, I normally would not use a foam cannon. I would just pull out my rinseless wash and just wipe it down with a rag. That will honestly be well enough to get this engine bay cleaned. But let's say if it's much dirtier than that, then this method will definitely work with an APC. It will get the job done. So just like that, we're ready for rinse off again. While I was rinsing off, definitely always be very careful with this piece, because over time, as they get wet, and if you yank on them, they'll get softer and they'll start breaking down. So this part, I always like to be very gentle with them and try to touch them as low as possible. Now, if you see bubbles coming out of it, definitely don't get your pressure washer too close to it because you might start damaging this insulation. So again, the wipe off, we're gonna start from the top. Just quickly go through all the wet surfaces so it doesn't leave water spots afterwards. Now for the main part, I'm gonna start removing all my coverings. And you can see, again, things are bone dry out underneath. So protecting it like this is definitely effective, even with a microfiber cloth. And again, just gonna quickly wipe down the water pools. Just wipe things dry and also do your final check and see if there's any pooling water, because you definitely don't want a pool of water sitting in your engine bay. So just like that, we're done. Now, of course, you see plastic here. We can definitely dress this, but we also have shiny parts here. So what I'm gonna do is I'll take some microfiber and just put it on top of the shiny part. Oh, not good. And now we can dress the engine bay. So again, the same dressing, just give it a couple of spritz. Now, if you do have a pool that you might have sprayed too much, just grab a towel and level it yourself. You can level it yourself, or you can just leave it and let the heat of the engine level it. We're gonna close the hood and let the engine heat up. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful and you learned a thing or two, and at least you found it entertaining. And I really want to thank you guys for all the support you've given me. And for the past few months, I've enjoyed so much making these videos, and your support has just made it so much better and more enjoyable to me. So thank you so much for always supporting and leaving likes and commenting and sharing things, helping me learn. So I want to thank those who always show up and show the support. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and stay tuned for the next video. Bye.